Hi everyone, this is Mike. This is day 2 of my personal challenge for 30 consecutive days of recording on a camera and growing my skill set and becoming a content provider. I found this CD in my closet the other day, and it's pretty interesting because 20 years ago, as I mentioned yesterday, I was actually going to school for multimedia production. And at the same time I was going to school to learn this stuff, I was in a band. And as you can see, the name of our band was called Disturbed. Obviously, I'm not in the metal band that created that song, The Sickness, but this was 1998, 1999, and we were the band from Chicago known as Disturbed. We played all over Chicagoland. You could have seen us in some of the local magazines that featured band names and stuff. But what I thought was cool is that I worked at a studio at the time when we cut this CD. There's about 4 songs in this. They're not very good, but they were a local garage band, and I think that my experience at the studio really shaped a big part of my life. See, when we found this studio, we were actually offered a deal. We could have recorded 4 songs and were given a rehearsal space to practice so we can get out of the garage that we were formerly practicing in. And in exchange for that stuff, I actually entered into an internship. Now, the guy who owned the studio was also an engineer and a producer, and so he would record a lot of the local artists like myself, but he also had contacts with some larger bands in Chicago at the time. You might have heard of bands like Ministry, bands like Survivor, Eye of the Tiger, that was their big song, the Screaming Trees, and another band called Styx. I met all those guys, and so I was actually working in a studio at the time, right when the recording industry was expanding. Now, 20 years later, everything is different, right? People have cell phones, they have microphones, they have computers, and so recording can be done a lot easier and a lot simpler. But at that time, there was no other way to get into the industry except for getting a foot in the door, and that's where I was at. But what happened was this studio I worked for, they had some faulty investments. They actually had a $750,000 state-of-the-art digital recording console that they purchased, as well as planning to expand their real estate and buying a property that was about 2 or 3 times as big. Now, long story short, that company that I worked for, they went bankrupt. They made too many large purchases and too many decisions that weren't feasible to them. And so I actually had to get out of the industry. I can no longer work for the music business or the people I was with. And my career actually took a different track. I got into heating and air conditioning after that. I got into financial services. But here it is 20 years later, and I'm really interested in getting back into this industry of content creation. I know that people have been doing this for a long time, and I'm brand new at doing it, but this is really where my passion is. Why am I telling you this? Because I think that the economy is changing. I think that going forward, people are going to have to learn how to produce content. People are going to have to learn how to speak into a microphone, maybe do a podcast, maybe do some more videos. You see it all over Facebook, all over Google, it's everywhere, right? And so I decided to jump on that train and learn how to share my ideas in a way that is going to be consistent with the economy going forward. The only drawback I have is that the political winds that be are now trying to prohibit the free exercise of speech for many people. Companies like YouTube and Facebook and Google and Twitter, they're starting to suppress people's ideas. If they're not congruent to whatever their agenda is, then these ideas are not being shared. On my podcast, The Invictus Mind, I actually interviewed the guy who is the CEO of Minds.com, which is one of these alternative platforms. And you can go ahead and listen to that all you want, but I really wanted to share some of my thoughts pertaining to free speech and why it's important to get a message out there. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but in 1996, there was a law that was passed called the Communications Decency Act, and there was actually a section of that act known as Section 230. And this is referenced a lot in arguments talking about the difference between a platform and a publisher and whether companies are liable for the content that is actually on those. I don't want to get into the weeds about all that, but it's really interesting that companies like Facebook and Twitter and the likes of them can actually pick and choose what they publish and what they allow as content to be provided. I'm not in favor of that at all. Look, you and I can disagree politically about anything under the sun, but just as much as I have a right to share my ideas, you do as well. And I think it's very important that we continue to produce content, to produce ideas, to share things with people so that these ideas do not get suppressed. As I mentioned, the economy is going to be changing. So I think that the way work is in the future, everybody with a camera and with a microphone and with content is going to be needed to be put out there so they can actually make money. I think gone are the days of working for factories and in manufacturing and working for one firm for 20, 30 years of your whole life. We've seen that over the last decade that these things are starting to change. And I really think that the future is going to be there for the content providers. So to prevent me from continuing to ramble for an unknown amount of time, I'm going to wrap it up here. I started my career 20 years ago in the music industry. I got 4 songs on here that if I figure out how to put on the internet, I'm going to go ahead and do that. But I really think that many of you should be learning skills about how to speak your ideas in public, behind a camera, on a microphone, or wherever, because we need to preserve our free speech. So whatever you got to say, feel free to say it. It probably won't offend me anyway, but the more that you do it, the more that we can maintain this right. And so this is my second day. Hopefully you've watched this far and it will continue to grow and learn more about who I am and what I'm all about. That's it. Have an awesome day.